question again? Like,
I guess it would just be more like, how to be a better training partner.
because
Um, for guys who are a lot larger than like their teammates or their opponents, because I have noticed
and
that
what was your point about feeling like you need to be more aggressive?
because nobody's moving, and if you let them, they'll just stay in one spot locked up the entire time.
Especially on the feet because they're afraid to tie up with somebody so much bigger and stronger.
Backpedal, or they just won't tie up, or they'll do anything they can to stay away from it. So for me, I felt I had to be more aggressive because I want my training.
Yeah.
But also, I didn't know how to get my training without.
Right. You didn't know how to make it beneficial for both of you.
Exactly.
So, we've talked about that before, where if you're so much bigger and stronger, and that's intimidating to a smaller, more timid person, especially who isn't naturally aggressive. So being more aggressive is actually the wrong way to go about it. So you want to focus on trying to let them know that you're going to take care of that person. You want your partners to know that you're not going to hurt them. So they need to feel comfortable that even if you are winning, that you're not going to take advantage of them and they're not going to end up getting severely injured or overly embarrassed. So a lot of it is just your approach as far as like how you get along with that person at the beginning and end of class. Are you guys on a friendly level? Like, do they at least think you're an okay guy? Are you welcoming as far as like inviting them to train with you? What's your approach there? Is it a little bit aggressive? Like, hey, you want to roll, or hey, you want to play, or you want to move around a little bit? It can be different depending on the person. But in general, you would want them to think that it's not going to be a serious competitive training session, that it's something that you guys are both using as a way to improve your individual goals. So one of the things when you're tying up with somebody who is timid is the very first touch. Like, for me, especially with new people who come in, you can tell they're a little wound up, and especially if they've never trained before, like they don't have any combat sports experience, and especially if this is their first time doing anything slightly aggressive, it's intimidating. And the only reason that you do it is because there's a fair amount of insecurity that you want to come into the martial arts gym to learn how to fight or to defend yourself, just so you know that you can be a little bit more comfortable and relaxed. So when I roll with somebody for the first time, it seems a little bit wound up. We tag in, and I don't take an aggressive posture with them. I just kind of stand there and just like I have my hands open too. So in general, like having your hands palms up or palms forward, not like hunched over and aggressive, ready to come forward and like actively making grips. And when I do that, I'm not being like condescending.
Right.
You have to just let them know, like, hey, this is not something that is just going to be immediately overwhelming. So you tag in, and I put my palms up, and I just try to make contact with them somewhere. And I don't do much with it. I just like let my hands sit there and see how they react. And most of the time, they're going to be really tense, and if they're at least willing to engage, they're going to be a little bit frantic, and they're going to do things that might seem overly aggressive from your point of view. But that's really them just having that nervous energy, not knowing how to deal with it, on top of being new to it, so they're not skilled enough to have an idea of what to do with their hands yet. They're just trying things.
Right.
So when that happens, you just got to kind of let them do that for a little bit, and you'll slowly turn it on enough to where once you realize that they're not going to run from you, then you can go ahead and start working a little bit of technique. But it has to be nice. It has to be done in a way that will build trust between you guys. So that way, when you do start picking up the intensity, they're going to be like, oh, Kyle's just he's just working on his game today. This, and then it's easier for them to relax into developing the disadvantaged positions and working on their defense, and knowing that they have enough time to where they're going to be able to work without getting hurt, and just having to fight for their life every single time. They know eventually, as you get more comfortable with each other, they know eventually, like when you start turning it on, that you're going to control them, you're going to eventually submit them, but they know that they trust you enough that they're going to be able to go to work the next day after that training session.
Yeah. Well, I understand what you mean about like not wanting to be hurt or timid of that, because it was a really sobering moment for me, especially when, because you know, after the rounds are over, we're looking for new partners. I'll stand in the middle and I'll put my hand up, saying like, "Hey, I need a new partner," and everyone will look away. They'll look for somebody else, anyone else to go to.
Yeah.
And it was kind of like a gut check moment, like, okay, I'm doing something wrong. Something needs to change, and I need to figure that out. And I think that's something that a lot of like really large, intimidating guys don't understand, is that by just beating your teammates up, you're not helping them.
Yeah.
You're hindering them.
Yeah.
Because they don't want to roll with you, because they know that they're just going to get beat up. So it's something that is kind of,
it puts them in that mind state, like, why even try? What's the point?
And it's something I kind of wish I would have learned earlier on. I feel like I would have been a much better training partner had I learned that I don't have to just smash the whole time or crash, as we talk about.
Yeah. Yeah, and you're able to develop your flow a little bit more, and especially like when you're not just throwing your training partners around, and it's easy to do when you're that much further ahead in terms of size and strength. You don't realize how much you're actually like throwing them around. You know, so if you are, especially when bigger guys are trying to develop their bottom game, like we talked about, if you're moving them and you're still stationary, too much strength, too much crash, you know. So you can use enough strength in order to hold the base position, like the basic required position in order to make your technique look effective as far as like building your frames, blocking them out. But after that, if you're moving them as opposed to like getting your hips out, sliding your hips through, and not having to completely manipulate them without changing your position, it's too much. And so that also like gives them a chance to deal with your technique, even though it's going to be different with that amount of strength difference. It gives them a chance to at least feel that and feel what a proper position is, knowing that it's, once somebody gets there like this, it's so much more effective, and Kyle doesn't have to use 100% strength. And then it eventually, if they're paying attention and they're asking the right questions or have the right focus, then eventually they will try to copy that, because it'll make more sense. Like, oh, this is why we do the technique here. Kyle doesn't need his big, strong muscles to make this effective. This works in general better than just pure athleticism. You know, the technique as far as framing, getting your hips out, trying to move out from underneath somebody's weight as opposed to trying to lift it. So that's one thing to think about for somebody who's bigger and stronger. What about like, what other things do you think are like stopping people from wanting to roll with you?
Aggressiveness is, like I was saying earlier, like, because I catch myself chasing people around the mat trying to just tie up even.
That's right.
So I'll catch myself even just dropping to down into like a half guard or like an open guard.
Pulling guard.
Just to even try and get them to engage a little bit.
Yeah, and then that's not beneficial for you if you feel like that's the only option. Like, you don't want to go completely belly up and not be able to drill your stand-up game too, because that's not helping you, and it's definitely not helping them because they don't have to develop their stand-up defense. Like, running and disengaging is one defense, but if you're going to try to engage as far as sport goes, or maybe you're not fast enough for self-defense to run away, eventually you will have to engage. So them being overly intimidated by your aggressive pursuit, that's really the problem. So like, if somebody does start disengaging and you have to chase them around the mat and it's just like a never-ending track practice, then really, instead of just, what I try to do is, instead of like pulling guard or giving them shit or even giving any kind of indication that I'm frustrated by it, I just stop and I'll just wait and I'll just be like, come on, not even like say it, just, and you don't want to let them know that it is aggravating you and start turning on the gas more, because of course that's just adding fuel to the fire. They're going to become more intimidated. They're going to fight harder to get away from you. So just by backing off a little bit, like if you feel somebody disengage, just back off a little bit and don't don't let it show that it's irritating. And then you try to make the soft touch and get them a little bit more comfortable with you as a person, as far as knowing that they're not going to get hurt if they do decide to try to engage. And even like, if you are going to want to let them take a top position, well, at least try to make it, an opening to where they can work on one of the takedowns that we've gone over. Let them go for it. Expose something, let them take you down. Try to have perfect technique on the way down while not using a lot of strength. And then once you get there, then again, trying to flow and not move them as much as possible. Because like, you're going to have to move them to an extent, but not as much as like what you're capable of versus what I'm capable of. So that's one way to try to at least get some sort of technical repetition instead of just falling down and waiting for them to get on top of you. At least you're forcing them to come in and get comfortable, try to go for something, and knowing like, okay, Kyle's going to let me work a little bit, and if I do something right, he's going to let me have it, as opposed to just meathead away from me because he knows he can. Which that's like really the only way that I get, smaller guys than me, or even some of the women that we train with, or even the kids, to want to roll with me. Is like, they have to know that if they're doing something right, that this is practice, and that it's meant for making mistakes, and it's meant for the constant repetition and exploring new positions. They know that once they start working on something, that if they're doing it right, I will allow it to happen, and they will have a certain amount of success in order to get a good feel for it. And then eventually that will translate into them being able to use it on people who are pretty close to their skill level, and eventually upping their skill level and competing with people who may have more experience than them. But just completely skipping positions or getting overly aggressive and adding more reason to be timid, it's definitely the wrong way to go about it.
Right.
So what about even like top position? Like, have you felt like there's any kind of issue there for you?
Not so much. I mean, like in mount or in like side control, I feel that they typically will just like lay there, and then I'll just swap positions or whatever. But ever since I started working on my flow, then I noticed like, people are more willing to move, or I'll even start changing up my side control game. I'll start going to knee on belly. I'll start trying to hit those position changes as well.
Yeah, and that's the thing too, is like, you have to manage your pressure. So that's actually great that you're not trying to that you're recognizing that just prying them open and just using pure strength to expose their arms, or just to crush them to where they have to fight just to even take a breath. Which to a certain extent you need that, but in the beginning, when you're just getting to know somebody and you're developing that trust with your training partners, you really can't do that. You give them a little taste of it, but then it has to be matched with plenty of opportunity for them to move. So like, when you change your position, or even trying to be aware of like, am I just completely crushing this person right now, or am I just like prying their arms away from their body? If you're managing your physical output, then you're developing a better sensitivity for distance, balance, and even just where they're trying to apply their technique. So you'll feel a difference in pressure and movement, that depending on, let's say side mount, you're gonna start being able to feel when they're trying to get their hips out, when they're trying to bridge, trying to get their frames. And sometimes you gotta have to just let them move in order to make sure that you guys aren't just stuck in one position for the entire time. It's not beneficial for somebody who's smaller and weaker, and especially new, to just spend all night just being crushed under side control. Like, they don't get a chance to go through their repetitions for their basic escapes to get their guard back. They don't get any practice with their shrimping, building their frames, and then it's discouraging, because then it's no point, because if they fight as hard as they can against even just half of your strength, well, now they're tired, and now the rest of their training is not beneficial to their burn.
And ruins it for the next time.
Yeah.
Because they know as soon as they get in that position, they're not going anywhere.
Yeah, so now they're going to give up.
So why bother? Right.
So when you manage your physical output and you're allowing them to follow through with something that they're doing technically correct, you're opening up the opportunity for both of you to explore different positions than you might not otherwise experience. And then also when you're matching their physical output, you might try to go for something in side mount, like maybe it's even Americana, and when you're matching their physical output, you recognize that maybe it's not as technically sound as it should be, and you realize where you're using strength as a way to carry your technique as opposed to support it. So that's something to think about still.
That's one thing I've noticed a lot too, like especially rolling with some of the blue belts, because they are a lot more technically sound than some of the newer guys that come through. I'll get a submission, I'm like, that was probably a little bit too much muscle. To call that it was perfect technique, or I got it with good technique.
Yeah, and you're gonna have to use a certain amount of strength too, and having strength is a good thing.
But overusing it is also a
when you're trying to technically develop, as far as the fight goes, if you got in a fight and had to defend yourself, or if you were going into competition, no, you're gonna go in full crash mode. You're gonna impose your will on them. You're gonna go ahead and use every tool at your disposal.
Right.
But as far as trying to develop technically, sometimes it is helpful, but more often than not, if you're a physical person, it is a hindrance.
Right.
And you need to learn how to hit a different gear and bring it down a little bit in order to make sure that you're not supplementing your technique or carrying your technique with your strength.
Well, I guess my main point I wanted to make is like being the biggest, strongest guy on the mat can be useful, can be very helpful for a lot of people. But if that's all you are, and you're not trying to also improve your technical game, or even allowing your teammates to improve their technical game, then that's all you want. You're just the big, strong guy that nobody wants to roll with because you know that they're just going to pick them up. So,
and then also injuries happen that way too, when people aren't aware of their physical capabilities.
Exactly. And honestly, it doesn't make me feel good. Like when I hurt my teammates, it really doesn't. It makes me sick to my stomach. And in my old team that I trained with in England, I broke 2 ankles and a couple of fingers, and I hyperextended the guy's arm. So I should have learned then that, like, hey, I probably should take this down. But
and then also, like, if your instructor wasn't telling you that, hey, you need to settle down, like it's only training. Like,
well, they told me that I wasn't allowed to do ankle locks anymore. The hyperextension wasn't necessarily my fault. I had the guy in a double leg and I had him above my head, and when I put him down, he stuck his arm out. But also, I didn't need to pull him up over my head. To get the takedown, I had him there.
Exactly. So you don't realize when you're going overboard, and then your team at a certain point, like if you're being too dangerous, then you should not be allowed to continue training. And that's the worst case scenario for everybody. You don't want anybody who's dangerous to their training partners on the mat, because it's already dangerous enough. There's already high enough risk for injuries. So if you are a bigger guy and you're finding yourself involved in training sessions where your partners are being injured, well, it's not just because they're not good enough. It's mostly because you're going overboard, and they're not able to defend you against you, for one. Even at half speeds sometimes, they're not just being crybabies. They're trying to get better, and at least when they're getting hurt, like the least you could do in the very beginning, like let's say it's somebody who's never trained before, realize like nobody will trust you, like you said. Nobody will want to train with you, and you're gonna go through plenty of gyms where you think everybody else is either being crybabies or the instructor is just not good enough to help other people get better, and then you're gonna start resenting your team, and then it's more about other people as opposed to your technical improvement. And then you're also going to be stuck at whatever level you get to before those problems start affecting whether or not you're welcome on the mat. So that all goes into it. You want to make sure that you're being considerate, and we started off with that. That's the main worry when anybody gets on the mat with somebody who's a lot bigger than them. Like, oh man, I'm just not going to be able to do anything. I'm going to get crushed.
And I used to find that flattering because I do work very hard on improving my physique and being a lot bigger, but I used to find it really flattering. Like some of the other guys will come up, like, oh man, you're just like rolling with a brick house. I mean, I just don't like it. And at first I was like, oh yeah, that's what I wanted.
Like, yes.
Until I had that moment when I was standing in the middle of the mat and everybody else was not wanting to do it. So then it was kind of like, okay, like,
yeah,
being big is great and all, but I'm not a good teammate.
Well, recognizing it right away, that's a mark of a good teammate. And everybody's going to make certain mistakes along the way. But what makes it acceptable is that you recognize it and you're taking active steps to change it. But again, it's not anything to come down on just being big and strong like that. I think that's one of the most important things there is for combat sports. But there's a time for it, you know, just like anything, like there's a time to flow, there's time to crash, and you don't want to always just be stuck in one mode. And then that means overall you're not going to be adaptable for when that one game plan doesn't work, whether it's you've got a great bottom game and you've got a real dangerous half guard, you've got a real dangerous full guard, you can submit and sweep people there easily, but what happens when you get with somebody who's bigger and stronger and you can't sweep them, or you can't get a hold of their arm, you can't take the right angle, now you're just getting crushed and they pass your guard? Well, how good are your mount escapes, right? I mean, or what if once you sweep somebody, they've just got such high defense, or they're big and strong enough to where they can just hold and lock you down? Well, what do you do then? Like, you've never diversified your approach, and it's going to frustrate you, and it's going to shut you down. So knowing that you can hit different gears just at will in order to just experience a new situation, that's one of the bigger things in the long run, and it will help technical development immensely.
Mm-hmm.
Was there anything else? I think we pretty much covered that.
No, if I have one piece of advice for big, strong guys who want to do jiu-jitsu, don't use it all the time, know when to use it, and be a better teammate.
Fuck yeah.